So now that we have ran a server and we use some Linux commands to bring it up, and we use something called user data to bring up the environment without even running commands, let's talk a little bit more about Linux commands that would help us understand how to navigate through a Linux environment. Now, depending on what you're gonna do in the future, it doesn't matter if you're gonna be a programmer or security analyst or whatever. I personally recommend that you learn at least the basics of Linux. Now, if you go online, there's gonna be thousands and thousands of articles of what commands and this commands, etc., etc., etc. In this case, I'm just gonna show you what I've used and what I've constantly used past what 6, 7 years now, just purely on Linux. So let's talk about that real quick. So what are the commands you usually have to learn? Now, throughout the years, I've kind of put into three types. Commands to get around, such as like creating files and moving directories and such. The other one is troubleshooting commands. And then the other one is text editors. Now, we'll talk more about that briefly right now. So, I'm not going to go into too much details because it's a little bit different than what you see here than actually running it so you can comprehend it. But these are some of the commands I've used where they're basically going to teach you how to, for example, list what's running. Well, sorry, list the files that are in the current directory, how to move around directories. Like, for example, Windows, how do you get from documents to downloads, or how do you get from the user to documents to um, videos or music, etc. And after that, we're gonna learn how to like move, remove, and copy files, and also to how to make a directory or folder in a sense, and how to create files with a quick touch. After that is kind of also understanding how we change the ownership of the files or the readability of the file. And as I shown earlier too, how to become an admin and run admin commands. And after that, also too, like how to use SSH. And then last but not least, cat. Cat is very powerful too to just show you what's the file and its contents. So this is usually what I use to kind of just get around, see what's going on with the system, look at the folders, look at the files, and just kind of get an understanding of what's in the system itself. Now, most of the times when instead of working on projects, we're troubleshooting stuff. Now, this is where troubleshooting commands come into play, where PX auxiliary is more like understanding of what's running, what are the processes running on your computer. Just like, hey, I have 20 Firefoxes open, or hey, I have 20 YouTube videos open at one time in a browser. Like kind of like something similar to that. Along with HTOP, that kind of shows you like, hey, what's your RAM, what's your CPU, what are your processes that are running, such as programs. Then after that is other troubleshooting commands such as netcat, which is NC, nmap. Another quick old school tool that's still used today is telnet. And also, if you want to reach some specific websites that have a HTTP server, HTTPS server, you can run quick curl or reachability commands such as traceroute. Now, another big thing is as far as commands, it's not really command, but more of a usage of a text editor. Just like you use Microsoft Word or Notepad, when you have your terminal, you can bring something similar up where you can bring up a text editor and edit the files. And this is great when you want to look at text files, you want to update, you want to change some configurations, or even just look at logs, for example. That's a great use of a text editor. And the two popular ones are like Vim or V or Nano. And after that is on the fly editors where sometimes you run some specific commands and you want to say, hey, I want to get the commands that give me this string or give me or replace this or just print me this. So these are kind of like the most common commands I've used here. Um, Usually people ask me like when you talk about Linux, like, hey, Mike, what are the common commands you use? And these are the ones I use constantly. I'll say maybe top 10 right here. And these are this is almost the same list as we saw earlier because this is literally what I do on a daily basis. SSH into machines. I use Get to control some repositories. I go around my directories like crazy. I edit files. I look at files quickly with cat. Then SCP, I copy files onto machines. LS to see what's the contents of my current directory. Sometimes I get lost, so I do a print working directory, PWD. I also run a telnet to make sure I can make connections to certain machines. I run mmap to make sure certain ports are open, and crow to make sure I can get to websites. So this is, for example, my commonly. So at the moment, I launched two EC2 instances. The reason behind this is because one is going to be used for me to access the machine, and the other one is going to be testing against the machine. The reason behind it is because I want you to get access to the machine and run some commands other than what we have seen. And then the other part of this is also how to use some of these troubleshooting skills. Troubleshooting commands against the other machine. So we can kind of take a look and just kind of see how it's kind of done. And so you guys can see what I kind of do sometimes and what I used to do back then in the day. So let's go ahead and take a look. What we're going to do is go over the commands that I shown you earlier and just kind of go through each one that's listed there and just go through each one and then just kind of build on top of that. So the first command we're going to run is ls. ls is basically going to give you a list of stuff that's currently in the current directory you're at. So for example, let's go look at the current directory we're in. Print working directory. So right now we're in the home slash EC2 user directory. This is usually shown by this sign right here, the tilde. This indicates we're home. Okay. So at this point, when you run a ls, this indicates that, hey, these are all the contents of the folder in EC2 user. So for example, if I were to run a touch, say file 1, file 2, file 3, this is going to create files for me. So now if I run ls, we're going to see now that we have file 1, 2, and 3. And then we have a folder called test1. Another way to run the ls command is like literally type in ls type space -l. This gives you a more in-depth view of what the contents are, and it's usually either going to be a file or directory. File, 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 and then directory. Usually the directory has a D at the very beginning. So sometimes when you're doing this, sometimes you get lost and sometimes you don't know where the hell you're at. So because of that, sometimes you want to move around and you want to know where you're at. So in this case, what we could do is say print working directory. This is telling me like, hey, my current directory is currently home-ec2 user. So for example, if I were to change my directory to test1, previously I was in the home directory, which is marked by the tilde, but now since I moved over to the test1 directory, it's listing it right here, and we can confirm this by running print working directory. There we go. So now it's telling us, hey, we're in the print working directory. Now at this point you're like, hey, how do I get back to my home directory, right? So it's pretty much easy. All you have to do is type in change directory space ... for back in a sense. Now that we see that the tilde is showing up, this indicates that, hey, it looks like we're back to the home directory. So if I type in print working directory, boom, I'm back in my home directory. And as we saw with the files earlier here at the very top, let's try ls-l. Boom, we're back in the same directory. Now, this is very common practice. You're going to run this a lot. And I'm talking about a lot. This is commands that I almost constantly use on a daily basis. Whether it's my machine, another machine, it doesn't matter. I usually run these commands like constantly. Now, the other commands you might get used to is what we call move, or remove, or copy. So what we're going to do with these commands is literally what it does. So move is literally going to move the file to whatever you want it to be. So for example, I'll say move file 1 to save file 111. If I run ls, I'm going to see that the file 1 isn't there anymore because we moved it to a new file called file 111, which is fine. Now, when we move, it's a permanent move. It's not copying. However, what I could do is if I wanted to copy the file and keep the original, I would run copy. So if I say copy file 2 to file 222, I'm going to see an output when I run ls of file 2 and file 222. So let's run that real quick. ls. Now I see file 2 and then file 22222, just like I said. Now at this point, sometimes you need to remove files, which is fine. It's literally the command rm, then the file name, which is file 3. There we go. So now that I run ls, I should not see file 3. I should only see file 111, file 2, file 222, and test 1. There we go. And if you wanted to remove a directory itself, you could just run this rm-rf remove force in a sense, and then type in test 1. Let's type in ls to look at the contents of the folder, the home directory. Boom. There's no more folder. However, say you want to recreate it. It's pretty much easy. You can do make directory test 111. Now let's look at the contents. There we go. Now at this point, this is kind of basic stuff like moving files, copying them over, moving them. It's kind of standard practice, most of the stuff here. After this is understanding what the files themselves are. So for example, if I run a clear to clear out my page, and I run a ls-l, I'm going to see the files right here, and there's something to the left of this. Now, these actually have a special meaning. This says like, hey, give permissions based off whatever rules are set here to specific people, groups, or anyone. So like, for example, if I were to say RW would be to read and write for the user. So in this case, it's like, hey, the user, EC2 user can read and write, which is fine. Now, this user can be part of a group. For example, say home, the home group, or the EC2 user group. Right here, the EC2 user group has read and write access to it also. But we're going to go into this a little bit more later just because it is a complicated topic, especially for new people. So I'm just going to let this be right now, but just letting you know, like, this is user and this is groups. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But let's clear the screen real quick. So at this point, we've run a couple of commands. And the one I mentioned earlier was sudo in my first video, sudo. Sudo is basically saying, hey, I have admin rights, run this as an admin. And that's literally what you're going to do. So if I do sudo touch, let me see, file 555, let's see what happens. Remember how I mentioned sudo is going to be admin? So when I created file 5555 or 555, it created under root, which is basically admin. And when it created that file, it said, hey, I'm admin. So when I'm running this, run it as admin. So this would be root. That's who created it. And root is the group. And this is the file that I created. So you notice where it says EC2 user and root. Remember, when you run sudo, you're running as admin, and admin's named root. So that's why it came out as root. So after this, um, so say if I do touch file, well, 777, we're now going to see that it says EC2 user right here. So now that we have ran these commands, majority has been things just to kind of get around. We also have SSH, but SSH is more of a special topic where it's just really connecting to an endpoint, and that's pretty much it, shorthandedly. But it's a topic we can talk about a little bit later because that's literally a whole discussion where you how to set it up, how to use keys, and all these other things. So it's one of those topics where it's literally one whole topic by itself. So what we're gonna do now is talk about the other commands, what we call troubleshooting commands, and we're gonna use that right now in the next video where we're gonna look at the other instance and just run commands against the other instance and run commands locally too. So let's go ahead and do that. Now that we have two instances running, what we're going to do is run some basic troubleshooting commands against the instance that we have. These are just basic commands that we tend to use to troubleshoot even the most basic things. So let's talk about it. So going back to the sheets of the troubleshooting commands that I've created, we're going to look at the third one going down. So we're going to look at netcat. Netcat is a very powerful tool that I currently use nowadays where it kind of tells you what's running on the port on the other machine. Like in this case, you guys do not even know what's going on. You guys don't even know what's running on the other machine at all. So what we're going to do is investigate during this troubleshooting thing. So let's try that real quick. So we have netcat. Then we have the public IP. Let's check the port 22, which is usually used for SSH. Let's take a look. So it is opening. It has open SSH, which is SSH, which is good. You can run Control C to get out of it. You can also run VZ. There you go. This tells me like, hey, it was able to connect. Now let's take another command. Let's try port 80. There you go. It connected on port 80. Now let's see what's running on port 80. Let's take over. There we go. It doesn't tell me at all. Interesting. Now let's try another port. Let's try 53. That's not working. Let's try with the dash VZ. See how this one doesn't say connected compared to the other one? So this netcat is a great tool to tell you, hey, if I can connect to the endpoint and if I'm able to hit the port and able to connect, it doesn't mean that that's not anything going on the other side. It just gives you confirmation that you're able to connect to the other side. So in this case, it's like, to me it sounds like something is on the other side of port 80, and on port 53 there's nothing. So next tool I use is called nmap. Now let's install it real quick. Remember sudo yum install nmap and -y. Perfect. So nmap is a great port scanning tool that a lot of people tend to use, where basically you can tell it, hey, run scans against this endpoint or this port and give me the results. So let's take a look real quick. So let's run nmap -p, which is for ports. We're going to do port 22, port 80, and port 53. And we're going to do -p and for silent. And we're going to declare the IP, which is this one right here. Okay. Oopsie. Let's make sure it's a 13. Let's run it. Let me clear this out real quick. Rerun it. There we go. So right now, let's see here. So we have ran against this IP address. Nmap ran his report, and it is the EC2 instance right here. So right here, we're seeing that port 22 is open and it runs SSH. Port 53 is currently filtered, and the service is domain. And port 80 is open and most likely is HTTP. So that gives an idea like, hey, I think this might be running a web server, which is fine. So let's see how we can connect to it. Let's try another method. Now let's try something called Telnet. Telnet is a very powerful tool where it was previously used back then to connect to endpoints, but the problem was that it was unencrypted. So if someone was able to capture the packets and see what you're communicating to the other side, guess what? It's in plain text. So it's literally just being on the side, just hearing someone just talking about a private conversation right next to them without like any encryption or anything protecting whatever they're conversating. So let's run a quick telnet against this port 80. Telnet. Whoopsie. Telnet. Oh, it doesn't want to paste it. Interesting. Let's copy this real quick. There we go. 80. Oh, not installed. Let's see if we can install it. Oh, I messed up. Sudo yum install telnet -y. Now this might not install just because of it being a legacy thing, but let's see. Oh, it installed. Cool. So let's run it. Let's run it real quick. Okay, perfect. So this tells me, hey, I was able to connect to it. So something is running on there that's available to the internet, and I'm able to connect to it. So this tells me like, hey, something's running on there, but I still don't know what the heck it is. So, okay, let's escape here. W control bracket, and then when you see this telnet, just quit. Perfect. Now, another command I tend to use for troubleshooting is curl. Curl basically is saying, hey, give me back the result at the endpoint. That's basically it. So let's try that real quick. Curl. Oopsie. Let's copy this real quick. Oh, what is all this? Huh. To me, this looks like a test page. Let's see. Okay. Oh, there you go. Test page for Apache. So this tells me like, hey, this is running Apache. So as you can see with the commands that we have ran here, let's see, history. You're gonna see a couple here. These are all the commands we ran previously, but we'll take a look at these. You're gonna see that the commands we have ran is very helpful in understanding how to reach an endpoint and how to kind of troubleshoot networking. And it's pretty simple once you kind of work with the commands and playing around with it. It gives you a very understanding idea of how you can see what's open as a port, if you connect to the port, if you're actually able to use different methods to try to see what's currently in that port. So these are the common commands I personally use even to this day. One more command is traceroute. Traceroute is basically you connect from one point to another, and it tells you what are the routes to it and if you're able to get to it. So for example, if I do traceroute google.com, let's see if it works. There you go. So these are all the hops that traceroute does to get to google.com, which gets to right here. So it takes about 12 hops to get to there. Let's try amazon.com. Ooh, that's a lot of hops. Almost 26 of them. So the reason behind we using traceroute is just to kind of give you an idea if you ever get to the endpoint. Most of the tests that we ran, like netcat and everything, is because I knew that the endpoint was there. But in order to troubleshoot actually getting there, I would run this traceroute command to see what's there. So at the moment, we know that hey, this server is running SSH and it's running the Apache web server that we have previously done in the past. Now, another troubleshooting command that we have used in the previous past is psaux process, and this is kind of flags to give you there. So these are all the processes that are currently running on my machine. Yeah, it's a lot. Processes, think of it as applications or software that's running on your machine. Just like Windows, it starts up, it opens drivers, it opens up the Wi-Fi, it does all these softwares, all these services that are running. Same thing here. It's literally just on a Linux machine. So in this case, like, hey, let's see if we can see the Apache server. So let's do that real quick. Let me clear this out real quick. So let's do px aux grep Apache. Oh, I didn't see. Oh, there you go. HTTPD. So my current machine is actually running Apache. Another thing you can also use too, like seeing what services are running your machine, just see if a lot of memory is being used or CPU is being used, is top or htop. Let's run top. There you go. So top is a very great tool to use because it tells you like, hey, what's the CPU usage? How much RAM is being used? What is the current load on the machine? Like how much load is on the CPU? I think this is what past minute, 15 minutes, an hour, something like that. How long your computer's been up? How many users are logged in? And it tells you like, hey, look, EC2 user, and it said, hey, I'm running top. So here we go. See, top and SSH. So this is currently telling me like, hey, this is what's currently running the machine, and here's a good examples, and here's the process ID. So here's what's going on. Recently, people have used, instead of using htop, instead of top, they use htop. Oh, it's not installed. Let's see if I can install it. Remember, it's sudo yum install htop. It didn't work because I didn't say yes with the flag. So I'm going to type in Y. There we go. Now let's type in htop. Yeah, it's more fancier, easier to read. So in this case, what we're seeing is that CPU is at what, 0.7%. The memory usage is about 100 megabytes over 965 megabytes. The load average is very low. What's the uptime? So HTOP is a new version of Top where it's a little bit easier to see and easier to understand for almost anybody that's familiar with the terminal itself. So it's something where you have to kind of get used to, kind of play around with, and just kind of see what the processes are. So that's it for this video. Point we kind of talked about like some of the basics of basic commands for Linux, some troubleshooting commands. Now at this point, the other thing you use is a text editor, just like Microsoft Word or Notepad or I think Google Docs. I think so. Usually for Linux machines, they have the popular ones, which is Vim, and Nano. Nano is probably the nicest one that's easier for users, and then V and Vim is more of a powerful text editor that's been around for a very long time. That's almost standard installed on all machines as far as Linux. Now, I first started out with Nano because it was pretty easy to use. You just type in Nano, and I could say, hey, text one or text one, and at this point when you're here, you can just start typing right away. And it's pretty much reminds you like a text editor like I had before. You type in whatever, press enter, whatever. And when you're done with this, all you have to do is press Control O. And at that point, it says, hey, what is the file name you want to save the file, which is on the bottom left right here. And I say, yeah, I want to name it as text1. So you press enter, and you can say wrote 16 lines right here. So if I exit with Control X, I'm done. So if I do cat text1, I can see everything I just wrote right now. Now, the other text editor V is more of a complicated one because you'll see right now shortly. So if I do text1, boom, we're in V. Now I'm going to type in the letters A, S, D, F. So at this point you're like, hey, what happened to the original A that I had? Now I can type here. I can press enter. Press enter, press enter, press enter. But at this point, it's like, okay, how do I exit out of here? And it's a little bit weird because when you see here this little insert right here, that means you're inserting characters. So if you want to stop, you have to press the escape key. Now at this point, it's still blank, and this is what confuses people because they're like, oh, so what do I do next? Where do I go? It's a little bit confusing. So, for example, if I type in the letter Q, nothing happens. If I type in the letter W, it just records. And that's it. And now we're at insert. So it's a little bit weird how V works, but it's very useful to know because it's something that whatever terminal you bring up in Linux, 90% of the chance is going to have V compared to Nano. And it's just different. I use it personally because it's any machine I go to, there's always V. And it's just thing you kind of have to play with and understand it at least once because you might be accessing a machine that doesn't have a text editor such as Nano, so you're gonna have to learn V. So just to make it simple for you, in order to use V, if you want to type, all you have to press is the I key. You're gonna see insert here at the bottom. After that, you can type in whatever you want. And then to exit, all you have to do is press escape. And if you want to save the file, you have to press colon, right, and then quit, and then exit. So now if we take a look at the file again, we're going to see all the changes. So as far as editors, I would recommend V personally, but you can use Nano starting because they're kind of common now to see in Ubuntu machines, but I would say stick to V. So that's just a quick lesson on video text editing.